Some know it as the Electronic Entertainment Expo, others know it as E3, but prior to 1995, nobody knew it at all, because it didn't exist, you fool! Originally, video games, consoles, and accessories were lumped into other, more general industry events, most notably the Consumer Electronics Show. This meant that they would compete for press and floor space with televisions, computers, sound systems, PDAs, appliances, and it wasn't a good fit, basically, and the majority of attendees didn't have a particularly strong interest in video games anyway. The birth of E3 marked a turning point for the video game industry, giving the games and systems we love a chance to stand on their own, demonstrate their merits, and win new fans. And with this year's E3 being the 25th E3, we thought the time was right to look back on the entire history of the event, ranking each one from worst to best. So what makes a great E3? Each of the major presentations offering a lot to be excited about is a good start. If one company has a great presentation and everyone else has a naff one, that doesn't really benefit the industry and gamers in general, it just benefits that one company. We're looking for the E3s that had something for everyone, and from which everyone went home happy. We'll be beginning, however, with those that had nothing for anyone, and from which everyone went home doing sad six in the back of the car. But before we get to the rankings, a few ground rules, if you will. Firstly, we'll be looking at the hardware or software in terms of its actual presence at E3. Obviously, every product will eventually hit store shelves, and we might learn then that it was actually better or worse than we expected, but today we're focusing only on E3. Secondly, we won't be taking into account the conditions actual attendees had to face, like cramped or smelly show floors, as we can't travel through time and attend every E3 ourselves. Believe us, we've tried. And finally, we will be taking into consideration E3 adjacent events such as Nintendo Directs and other broadcasts. They aren't technically part of E3, but they are timed to coincide with it and further show off the year's wares. Also, sometimes products are shown off at 2, 3, or even more E3 events in a row, so don't yell at us if we put something in the wrong year. We've done our very best to put each product into the year in which it had its largest or most important E3 presence. Actually, you know what? Do yell at us. We know that's how you express love. Let's rank 'em. I'm Ben from Triple Jump, and here is every E3 ranked from worst to best. Number 24, E3 2011. It would be difficult to imagine an E3 more underwhelming than what we were treated to in 2011, short of everyone just forgetting to turn up one year. Microsoft did show off Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, but spent much of the rest of its time spotlighting games for its struggling Kinect, which had failed to be the Wii killer the company had hoped for. Not to worry though, Nintendo was debuting a Wii killer of its own, the confusingly named Wii U, which never quite managed to sell the public on its unique charms. E3 is perhaps the most important opportunity to craft your message for consumers, and the Wii U announcement and launch did little to clarify the confusion that plagued the system throughout its life. Sony trotted out the PlayStation Vita, which, like the Wii U, was mishandled by its parent company and underappreciated by consumers. While both the Wii U and the Vita have their defenders, and rightly so, it's hard to argue that either console was given the chance to live up to its potential. When the highlights of E3 are bits of hardware that died uniformly slow, unmourned deaths, you know it was a bad year. Number 23, E3 2003. Half-Life 2 confirmed! Yes, Valve's masterpiece was the hit of E3 2003, and it probably would have been the hit of any E3, to be honest. As well as the game has aged by today's standards, for 2003, its physics engine, graphics, and incredible scripted events that unfolded during the course of actual gameplay stole all the thunder from the bigger companies. Not that the bigger companies had much up their sleeves anyway. Sony mentioned but did not debut the upcoming PlayStation Portable. Nintendo showed off some fun but far from essential multiplayer titles like Pac-Man Versus and The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. Microsoft technically continued to exist, but the strangest presentation involved Nokia attempting to go toe-to-toe with the Game Boy Advance and PSP with its new N-Gage. That's a tough sell on its own, and the presentation did it no favours. Several of the games just didn't work. All of the games looked terrible. The system was capable of full motion video in the same way that flipbooks are capable of full motion video. Nokia chose to unveil the price of this year's must-not-have system with a young model who stepped onto the stage and took her top off to reveal the price. $299, by the way, painted on her stomach. Great. Number 22, E3 2008. At E3 2008, the big names focused less on moving forward than they did on improving what they already had. Not a bad strategy, although obviously a less exciting one. For Microsoft, this meant updating the Xbox 360's interface to include customizable avatars, better navigation, and Netflix compatibility. For Nintendo, this meant Wii Speak, which added voice chats to a small number of games, and Wii Motion Plus, an accessory that basically made the Wii remotes do what they were supposed to have done all along. For Sony, this meant, nothing really, because the PlayStation 3 was already pretty great, and they used this opportunity to focus on games instead. Software between the 360 and the PS3 gave us a lot to be excited about too. Gears of War 2, Resident Evil 5, Final Fantasy 13, God of War 3, Dragon Age Origins, Left 4 Dead, and probably the most exciting title in years, Fallout 3. Nintendo, clearly suffering some kind of significant head trauma, turned its own showcase over to Wii Music. It would be funny if it weren't so sad. Number 21. E3 2013. You know what E3 is a great place for? Showing off upcoming hardware, as Microsoft did with its Xbox One and Sony did with its PlayStation 4. You know what E3 is a great place for? Spotlighting strong titles in a console's launch lineup, as Microsoft did with Dead Rising 3, Halo 5, and Sony did with Infamous Second Son and Killzone Shadow 4. You know what E3 is a great place for? Working hard to keep momentum going for your most recent console, as Nintendo did with games like Bayonetta 2, The Wonderful 101, Super Mario 3D World, Mario Kart 8, and a new Smash Bros. You know what E3 is a terrible place for? Making questionable jokes, as Microsoft did during its press conference when a male host told a female co-host to just let it happen and it'll be over soon. Here's a clip of that.
I can't even block correctly, and you're too fast.
There we go. Just let it happen, it'll be over soon.
Ugh. While there's absolutely enough room to argue that he didn't mean anything by the comment, the gasp from the audience made clear that it came across a little predatory. Microsoft not only acknowledged the inappropriate joke later, but apologized for it and distanced the company from it. You're supposed to give attendees something to talk about, Microsoft, but not like this. Please, not like this. Number 20. E3 2001. The year 2001 once represented fantastical dreams of the future, but now it officially qualifies as simpler times, and perhaps nothing illustrates that better than Shigeru Miyamoto showing off a Wavebird controller to an audience that can't believe its eyes. It's quite amazing to think that, until quite recently, the concept of a wireless controller could blow minds. Most of the attention went, understandably, to how Nintendo and newcomer Microsoft would fare against the PlayStation 2, which had released the previous year and immediately asserted itself as the must-have console of the generation. Nintendo showed off the GameCube and the Game Boy Advance, both of which were solid consoles, and with the Nintendo branding, fans could be sure of some great exclusive games, but they were difficult to get excited about. Microsoft, however, showed off its original Xbox. Let me reread that. Microsoft attempted to show off its original Xbox. The console malfunctioned and demos refused to play, more or less ensuring that Sony would reign comfortably for at least one more year. Number 19. E3 2002. E3 2002 was a victory lap for Sony. It had already killed off Sega as Nintendo's primary competition, and it wasn't done yet. At E3, Sony gloated about the PlayStation 2 selling more than 30 million consoles worldwide, a number it was confident Nintendo's GameCube and Microsoft's Xbox would not be able to reach, and they were right. Aside from this grandstanding though, E3 2002 lacked big moments. The game that garnered the most press attention was Doom 3, which genuinely seemed like it would revitalize the series that had laid dormant for around a decade. The lines to watch a preview of the game were enormous, and nothing else that year was able to steal the spotlight. There were a few other major games getting attention though: Metroid Prime, Time Splitters 2, Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, Team Ninja's upcoming reboot of Ninja Gaiden. But as much as E3 had been historically dominated by the major console manufacturers in any given year, this one belonged entirely to a single piece of software. Great news for id Software, but less great for those wanting an overall impressive E3. Number 18. E3 2009. Fans of hardware announcements should have been thrilled about E3 2009. Should have been. All three of the big players announced notable new hardware, but Microsoft's big announcement was Project Natal, which you may remember as the Kinect. Sony's was the PlayStation Move. Both of them were direct responses to the popularity of Nintendo's motion-controlled Wii, but neither of them received anywhere near the interest of that years-old console. Thanks mainly to PlayStation VR, the Move still has a presence in the market today, but Microsoft never found the software necessary to convince the public that Kinect was worth owning, apart from Kinect Star Wars, obviously. And hey, fair enough, because it wasn't. So while Sony and Microsoft tried to play catch-up to Nintendo, what did the Big N announce? The Wii Vitality Sensor, which monitored your pulse while playing games. If only it were monitoring the pulse of the audience as the announcement was made, Nintendo could have cancelled it even more quickly. For a hardware-focused E3, it's really the software that ended up deserving attention. Crysis 2, Mass Effect 2, Left 4 Dead 2, Modern Warfare 2, Assassin's Creed 2, Mario Galaxy 2, and Uncharted 2 were all either announced or shown with new software. There's something all of these games have in common, but I can't quite put a finger on two. Number 17. E3 1996. When the second ever E3 rolled around, two of the three major presenters were still reeling from poor showings at the first E3. Nintendo's Virtual Boy and Sega's Saturn had both flopped, and the new kid on the block, Sony, had an unexpected smash with the PlayStation. The future was anyone's guess. Nintendo, wisely, used Super Mario 64 to demonstrate the capabilities of its upcoming Nintendo 64 and even announced that it would cost $50 less than a PlayStation. Not a bad move. But Sony used E3 to announce that the price of the PlayStation was dropping by $100. Sad trombone, Nintendo. Sad trombone. For the second year running, Sony's cutthroat pricing defined the event. Both Nintendo and Sega scrambled to announce further price cuts to match the cost of the PlayStation before the end of E3, a necessary move, but not one that made either of those companies look especially good. They were, after all, reacting to Sony's moves rather than defining themselves with their own. Young upstart Sony was already calling the shots, and Nintendo and Sega were both listening. Speaking of upstarts, some nobody called Microsoft attempted to present Windows as a competitive gaming environment as well. I wonder if that ever led to anything. Number 16. E3 2012. With the exception of Nintendo singing the virtues of the Wii U it announced the previous year, E3 2012 was all about software, and there were some pretty big names shown off. Are you ready? Here's a list. Dead Space 3, New Super Mario Bros. 2, Need for Speed Most Wanted, Watch Dogs, Halo 4, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, Far Cry 3, Resident Evil 6, Rayman Legends, South Park The Stick of Truth, Assassin's Creed 3, Pikmin 3, and The Last of Us were just a few of the major titles on display, and they were all met with a fair amount of enthusiasm, and that's what we're focusing on in this list, by the way, just in case you didn't remember from the start, so we'll leave it up to you to argue in the comments about which ones ended up being disappointing. Beyond that, Microsoft clung to the hope that someone, somewhere actually wanted a Kinect and showed off a few titles that did little to sway public opinion. Evidently convinced that cramming more things that people absolutely did not want into the Xbox 360 was the way forward, the company announced that the console would now use Internet Explorer 10. It was an E3 that definitely featured games worth keeping an eye on, but the presentations weren't much more than a spreadsheet full of release dates. Number 15. E3 2010. E3 2010 wasn't a huge event for software, and how interesting it was for hardware comes almost entirely down to your opinion of Nintendo's 3DS. The announcement of a somewhat more powerful DS with glasses-free 3D technology was certainly intriguing, but it had very few, arguably no, must-have titles at launch, meaning it had a very high-profile stumble right out of the gate. Although, having said that, support for the console picked up about a year later, and it's only winding down now, almost a decade after the system's launch, so a bungled beginning far from killed it. Elsewhere, Microsoft popped back up to see if anybody wanted to connect yet. Nobody did, so it climbed back into its hole for another year. Notable game announcements and showcases included The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which made it clear in its own demonstration that the motion controls were going to be terrible, so bonus points for the unintentional honesty, Nintendo. There was also Epic Mickey, Little Big Planet 2, Dead Space 2, Portal 2, Infamous 2, and possibly some other things that weren't sequels. It was a fairly lazy year for E3, and an understandably forgotten one. Number 14. E3 1995. The very first E3 took place before the internet was the ubiquitous hype monster we know and love today, so you might expect that there was little in the way of major announcements and showmanship for which the event has come to be known for. And you'd be right, help yourself to a cookie, not that one! However, it was far from devoid of historical significance. Nintendo showcased its groundbreaking Virtual Boy, which grabbed the industry's attention just long enough for everyone to ask what the hell the company was thinking. Bigger news came from Sega's conference, during which the company announced that its brand new Sega Saturn was, surprise, in stores right now, and you could pick one up for your kids on the way home for a mere $399. But that turned out to be an unintentional setup for Sony to hit a grand slam with what is still one of E3's most legendary moments. Sony Computer Entertainment America's president Steve Race stepped up to his podium, said $299, and returned to his seat to rapturous applause. To this day, it marks the one and only time E3's attendees witnessed an actual murder. Number 13. E3 1998. To say Sega struggled at the first few E3 events would be an understatement. To say Sega would have been better served by publicly lighting itself on fire at the first few E3 events would also be an understatement. But in 1998 they killed off the Saturn and hit hard with a genuinely impressive upcoming system called the Dreamcast. Deliberately cultivating an air of secrecy by hosting demonstrations behind closed doors and turning away those who weren't on the very short guest list, Sega turned its Dreamcast into a talking point. The press discussed its graphical capabilities favorably compared to its rivals, the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, and the system seemed not only like Sega's last chance to survive in the console game, but a good one at that. The biggest game of E3 1998 was definitely The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, but aside from that and the Dreamcast, there wasn't much of note. Microsoft showed off some speakers, VM Labs demonstrated technology that allowed DVD players to play games, Cyberspace unveiled a seat called the Rock and Ride, which would vibrate beneath you as you gamed. The 90s were weird, friends. Number 12. E3 1999. Without question, E3 1999 belonged to Sega. The Dreamcast was due to release shortly after in the West, it was already available in Japan, and Sega made sure everyone knew it. The company announced an impressive 15-game launch lineup, a low price of $199, and a release date of September the 9th, 1999, ensuring that their clever choice of date would be rendered the same in both the North American and EU markets. Look at that. For the first time ever, then, it was up to Nintendo and Sony to follow behind. Nintendo announced an upcoming console, what we'd eventually know as the GameCube, and Sony teased a successor to the PlayStation. Neither company had much to show, though, and relied on games for their existing systems to carry the conversation. These included Final Fantasy VIII, Ape Escape, Dino Crisis, Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dark, Crash Team Racing, and plenty of other good ones. But E3 1999 was the first time Sega had the spotlight all to itself. And as we all know, it would also be the last. Number 11. E3 1997. E3 1997 lacked major announcements, but it introduced the world to an absolute flood of games that would go on to be considered some of the best of all time. This includes the original installments of series including Half-Life, Fallout, and Metal Gear Solid, which debuted with a non-interactive video loop that got a huge amount of attention from the press. People inherently knew that this was a game to keep an eye on. In addition, there was GoldenEye 007, an early version of Conker's Bad Fur Day, Final Fantasy VII, Resident Evil 2, Banjo-Kazooie, Tomb Raider 2, and Superman 64, which wouldn't be released for another 2 years, and which someone, we suppose, decided deserved an E3 spotlight as much as the other games we've mentioned. Time makes fools of us all. Speaking of games that wouldn't be released for some time, E3 1997 also saw the announcement of Duke Nukem Forever, which I think we can all agree was worth waiting for. Oh, yeah. Yep. Number 10. E3 2000. After E3 1999, Sega was in a position to again become a major force in the console market. By E3 2000, however, it had already had any momentum gobbled up by Sony's PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2, you see, was already available in Japan, and for its looming Western release, Sony made clear that it would be the must-have console of its generation. How did it do that? By promising 50 games at launch and the exclusive rights to Metal Gear Solid 2. If you wanted this game, Sega and Nintendo were not an option, and everybody wanted this game. Sony was not messing around. Nintendo, on the other hand, was messing around. One of its most notable announcements was that the Game Boy had sold its 100 millionth unit, and while it's impressive that a system that had been around since 1989 was still a hit, it wasn't the forward-thinking announcement E3 attendees were hoping for. And Sega? Well, Sega was trying. It announced Samba de Amigo, if that's... I'm not really sure how you pronounce that. It announced Space Channel 5. It announced Seaman. It even announced that you could get a free Dreamcast by signing up to the Sega Net online service. It was a desperate move to get the system into more homes, but since you almost certainly had a PS2 instead, you know exactly how well that worked. Number 9. E3 2018. E3 2018 brought out both the good and the bad. On the good side, we saw spotlights and debuts for Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Dragon Quest XI, Tetris Effect, Fire Emblem 3 Houses, Unravel 2, Octopath Traveler, Forza Horizon 4, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Beyond Good and Evil 2, Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate, Devil May Cry 5, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Just Cause 4, Ghost of Tsushima, Cyberpunk 2077, and a pair of absolute stunners from Sony in the form of Marvel's Spider-Man and The Last of Us Part 2. On the less good side, there was Fallout 76. Whatever each of us may personally feel about the game, there is no denying that Bethesda's reveal was something of a confused mess. Bethesda representatives even went on an interview tour afterwards to clarify what on earth the game was even about, and of course, that only sparked even more confusion. What ultimately turned out to be a standalone multiplayer game in a slightly tweaked version of the Fallout engine, see, Bethesda? You could have said that, has been an unbroken chain of controversy, misinformation, and broken promises, stretching all the way back to this one presentation at E3, which is bound to stand out as the most memorable moment of the year for all the wrong reasons. Please watch our video all about it. Number 8. E3 2007. E3 2007 was a decidedly smaller event, moving to a smaller venue and maxing out at only 1/6 the attendees of the previous year. Appropriately, the announcements were quite a bit smaller too. Sony showed off Metal Gear Solid 4, Gran Turismo 5 and Infamous. Microsoft devoted much of its time to the Xbox Live Arcade and a partnership with Disney to distribute its films via the 360. And that cleared the way for Nintendo to grab the top spot that year, and Nintendo announced the Wii Wheel! Okay, we're being cheeky here. Devoting any attention at all to the Wii Wheel alone would have been insane, but this doubled as an announcement for Mario Kart Wii, featuring competitive online play. Attendees also got a taste of Wii Fit, which was more of a fitness application than a game, and which would further solidify the Wii's place in the market as the console for the entire family. More traditional fare from the Big N came in the form of The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, and more complete looks at Super Mario Galaxy and Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Nintendo clearly had the most exciting conference, but sadly, it didn't have much competition. Number 7. E3 2016. 2016 was almost a great year for hardware announcements, as Sony debuted the PlayStation VR, announcing as well that it would be compatible with a whopping 50 games at launch, and Microsoft debuted the Xbox One S and Project Scorpio, which would become the Xbox One X, absolutely thrilling fans of brand confusion. Game changers? Not really, but it's nice when all three major console developers show off new hardware. Nintendo, of course, had the Switch, which it decided not to bring along. It was a strange decision, and it's no less puzzling with a few years of hindsight. Instead of showing off the hardware we were assured was ready to hit shelves, Nintendo dedicated almost its entire E3 presence to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Certainly a fantastic and exciting game, but more fantastic and exciting than learning about the new console we could play it on? Not quite. Otherwise, it was a good, though not great, year for games. We saw Prey, Resident Evil 7, Gears of War 4, Final Fantasy 15, The Last Guardian, the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, and Death Stranding, the new game from Hideo Kojima with a tentative release date of June 2093. Number 6. E3 2004. E3 2004 didn't have a huge number of games or announcements to recommend it, but what was shown off was quite great. Microsoft put the spotlight on Halo 2, the sequel to the runaway success that had more or less single-handedly made the Xbox a force to be reckoned with. Sony showed off the impressively violent God of War to attendees who were more or less immediately sold on the new IP. And EA introduced the world to The Sims 2, which we have on good authority ended up being the reason you kept forgetting to do your homework. The biggest reveal of E3 2004 was Nintendo's trailer for what would become The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. The video earned rapturous applause and made Nintendo the biggest winner of the event, but it had to be said that Sony practically handed them that title. As while Nintendo had demo units of its upcoming DS handheld ready to wow the press, Sony showed off its PlayStation Portable in non-working form only. This half debut undoubtedly made it more difficult for the PSP to compete with Nintendo's new sensation and left consumers with exactly one viable option when it came to handheld gaming. So Sony screwed over its first portable console, but surely it would do better by its next one, right? Number 5. E3 2015. From the very beginning, E3 had mainly been focused around three big names: Nintendo, Sony, and either Sega or Microsoft. Other companies showcased their wares, but rarely, if ever, did they get the full attention of attendees the way the main three players did. That is, until E3 2015, when two other big names held court and together opened the door for more companies to bowl audiences over with big announcements. Bethesda held its first showcase. It revealed Dishonored Definitive Edition and Dishonored 2, it showed off gameplay for huge upcoming games such as Fallout 4 and Doom, and it not only revealed Fallout Shelter, but released it right there and then. Right from the get-go, Bethesda made a big enough splash that the company became a fixture of E3 moving forwards. The other big name was Oculus, which helped usher in a new generation of virtual reality with the Rift, expanding on gaming as we understood it and making the industry, for the first time, take VR seriously. From the main three, we had games. Dark Souls 3, Horizon Zero Dawn, Cuphead, the Hitman reboot, Super Mario Maker, Kingdom Hearts 3, Rise of the Tomb Raider, South Park, The Fractured But Whole, Shenmue 3, Batman Arkham Knight, and the game that would become Nier Automata. Oh, and we're kind of sure someone mentioned a Final Fantasy VII remake? Maybe? It's hard to imagine a more appealing batch of games than what we were shown that year. Number 4. E3 2017. Outside of Nintendo, there was little in the way of huge announcements at E3 2017. Microsoft showed off Crackdown 3 and Sea of Thieves, EA showed off A Way Out and Anthem, Ubisoft revealed Far Cry 5, Assassin's Creed Origins, and Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle, Sony showed off Uncharted: The Lost Legacy and the impressive new direction for God of War, Bethesda announced The Evil Within 2 and Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, as well as the Creation Club, which was an innovative new way for gamers to pay for things they usually got from mods for free. Then there was Nintendo, which, after deciding to hold off on showcasing the Switch in 2016, built instead towards a huge, proper debut at this year's event, and that gambit paid off. There was little to pull attention away from Nintendo's daring new console, and Super Mario Odyssey looked every bit the Mario game fans had been waiting for. In addition, Nintendo promised we'd get Fire Emblem Warriors, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Metroid Prime 4, new Pokemon games, and more. It was exactly the shot in the arm Nintendo needed after wiping its hands of the Wii U, and it's easily one of E3's most impressive comebacks. Number 3. E3 2014. E3 2014 was another year that made it all about the games, and what games they were! Microsoft had Rise of the Tomb Raider, Halo 5 Guardians, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, Dragon Age Inquisition, and Scalebound, a badly needed Xbox One exclusive from Platinum Games that ended up being the best cancelled game of 2017. Well done. Sony's exclusives fared much better though, with must-have titles including Little Big Planet 3, Uncharted 4, Bloodborne, and, okay, yes, No Man's Sky, but admit it, you were excited too. Ultimately, it was Nintendo that desperately needed some positive press, as its Wii U console was struggling very publicly, and sure enough, they announced and showed off some genuinely great games. Hyrule Warriors, Yoshi's Woolly World, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, and Xenoblade Chronicles X all went on to receive a warm critical reception, but sadly, none of them were able to save the system. They did also announce amiibos, however, and while these little plastic statuettes wouldn't have rated a mention most years, they actually turned out to be the most successful thing Nintendo showed off at E3, and they're still selling well today. Number 2. E3 2006. E3 2006 saw all three major console developers going head to head to head. The Xbox 360 was already on shelves, so it was up to the other two to sell the world on their new systems. For Sony, this was the powerful PlayStation 3. For Nintendo, it was the accessible and urgently lovable Wii. This event helped the Wii go overnight from being an easily dismissed novelty with a mildly profane name to truly capturing the public interest. Nintendo showed off Wii Sports, which is still, to this day, the best-selling console exclusive of all time. And yes, we know it was bundled in, but even so, that's impressive, alright? The company leaned into the simple pick-up-and-play addictiveness that made the Wii an essential purchase across all age groups, and to prove the system would be getting traditional gaming experiences, they also provided previews of Super Mario Galaxy, Twilight Princess, and Metroid Prime 3. People waited in lines for more than 4 hours to get their hands on the system, successfully stealing the thunder from Sony and Microsoft. The Xbox 360 understandably received far less attention than the two new consoles, but Microsoft did show off some great games such as Mass Effect, BioShock, and Assassin's Creed. It was a strong lineup, but not an exclusive one. Number 1. E3 2005. It's difficult for any E3 to top the incredible announcements of 2005. Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft each hit hard with new console reveals, and they were all great ones. Nintendo revealed the Wii, at this point known as the Revolution, which would ultimately become a massive success for the company and lock down its appeal to the casual market for years to come. Microsoft showcased the Xbox 360, which didn't get anywhere near as exciting a debut as it deserved. Even so, the 360 solidified Microsoft as a major player in the console market, proving the original Xbox was not a fluke. Then there was Sony with its PlayStation 3, which seemed to be as crucial an upgrade from the PS2 as that system was from the PS1. Not to put too fine a point on it, but each of the three companies announced one of the best consoles ever at the same event. That's something that had never happened before and may never happen again. If you were looking instead towards software, you were still well served. Super Smash Bros. For the Wii, The Witcher, Alan Wake, Call of Duty 2, Spore, Hitman Blood Money, and The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion were just a few of the games that got the world excited at that event. E3 2005 was an absolute spoil of riches, and it set the bar at a height that has not been matched since. But where will E3 2019 fit in? I know the answer, but I'll never tell. Did your favourite moments make the cut? What memorable announcements did we miss? Had there been an E3 in 1922, what company do you think would have had the best showing? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you have any suggestions for other every X ranked worst to best videos, let us know. We may use your idea for a future list, perhaps even to be announced at E3! Of course not. We aren't invited, and neither are you. You can follow myself and Triple Jump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon? Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben from Triple Jump, and thanks for watching.